The mud splattered across her worn leather boots as Eleanor Hayes limped through the main street of Dodge City, Kansas, her right leg dragging slightly behind her with each determined step, and the whispers followed her like vultures circling wounded prey on this sweltering August afternoon in 1878. She kept her chin high despite the burning shame that crept up her neck, despite the way Martha Kenning and her gaggle of gossiping hens stood outside the general store, their fans fluttering like the wings of predatory birds as they watched her struggle past with her basket of laundry balanced against her hip. Eleanor had learned to ignore most of the stares in the 6 months since she had returned to Dodge City, but some days the weight of judgment pressed harder than others, and today was one of those days when every step felt like wading through quicksand. "Poor thing," Martha's voice carried clear across the dusty street, pitched just loud enough to ensure Eleanor would hear every poisoned word. 23 years old and ruined. What man would want a crippled wife who cannot even walk properly? She should have stayed in Abilene where nobody knew her shame. The other women tittered behind their gloved hands, and Eleanor felt the familiar sting of tears threatening to betray her composure. She had heard variations of this cruel assessment more times than she could count, but the words still landed like physical blows against her already battered pride. Her limp was not something she could hide, not something she could wish away no matter how many nights she had spent praying for a miracle. The Comanche raid 2 years ago had left her with more than just a scarred leg and a permanent reminder of the worst night of her life. It had stolen her confidence, her sense of safety, and apparently her value in the eyes of polite society. She pushed through the door of Wong's Laundry with more force than necessary, grateful for the blast of steam and the comforting smell of lye soap that greeted her. Mr. Wong looked up from his pressing board and offered her a kind smile that asked no questions and passed no judgment. He was one of the few people in Dodge City who treated her exactly the same as he had before the raid, before her injury, before she had become the subject of endless speculation and pity. "Miss Hayes," he said with a respectful nod, "your washing is ready. Very clean, very nice." "Thank you, Mr. Wong." Eleanor counted out her coins carefully, painfully aware of how light her purse had become. The seamstress work she did brought in barely enough to pay for her room at the boarding house and put food on her table. Most of the wealthy ladies in town preferred to hire someone without her obvious disability, someone who could make house calls without causing a spectacle or requiring extra time to navigate stairs and uneven ground. She was loading the clean laundry into her basket when the door burst open with such violence that the little bell above it nearly flew off its hook. 3 men stumbled inside, their voices loud and their movements uncoordinated with drink despite the early hour. Eleanor recognized them as ranch hands from the Bar K spread, the kind of men who spent their wages as quickly as they earned them on whiskey and card games. "Well, well," the tallest one drawled, his eyes landing on Eleanor with an expression that made her skin crawl. "If it is not the crippled seamstress, tell me, sweetheart, do you charge less for your services on account of being damaged goods?" His companions erupted into laughter that sounded like the braying of donkeys, and Eleanor felt her face flush hot with humiliation. She tried to step around them toward the door, but the tall man deliberately moved to block her path, swaying slightly as he looked her up and down with insulting thoroughness. "Excuse me," Eleanor said firmly, despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. "I need to pass." "What is your hurry? We are just being friendly." The man reached out as if to touch her arm, and Eleanor jerked backward instinctively. Her bad leg betrayed her, buckling slightly, and she would have fallen if her hand had not shot out to grab the edge of Mr. Wong's counter. The men laughed harder at her struggle, and Eleanor felt something inside her chest crack open like an egg. She had endured so much, survived so much, only to be treated like an object of ridicule by men who had never known a day of real hardship in their pampered, privileged lives. Anger surged through her veins, hot and righteous, but before she could find her voice to tell these fools exactly what she thought of them, the door opened again. The lady said, "Excuse me?" The voice was quiet, almost conversational, but it carried an edge of steel that cut through the laughter like a knife through butter. "I suggest you step aside and let her pass." Eleanor looked up to see a man she did not recognize standing in the doorway, backlit by the bright afternoon sun, so that for a moment he seemed like something conjured from shadow and light. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and eyes the color of winter storm clouds. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy, dusty denim trousers, a faded blue shirt, well-worn boots with spurs that chimed softly with each step as he moved further into the laundry. A gun belt rode low on his hips, but his hands hung relaxed at his sides, showing no immediate threat even as his entire posture radiated quiet danger. The tall ranch hand turned to size up this new arrival, and Eleanor saw the moment his alcohol-fogged brain registered that he was outmatched. The stranger might have spoken softly, but there was nothing soft about the way he held himself, nothing uncertain in the set of his jaw or the steadiness of his gaze. "We were just having a bit of fun," the ranch hand muttered, but he was already moving toward the door, his companions following like chastened schoolboys. "Fun should not come at someone else's expense, the stranger said, still in that same quiet tone that somehow commanded absolute attention. "Now get out before I decide to teach you some manners the hard way." The three men practically tripped over each other in their haste to leave, and the door swung shut behind them with a decisive click. The silence that followed felt thick and strange, broken only by the hiss of Mr. Wong's steam press and the thundering of Eleanor's own pulse in her ears. "Are you all right, miss?" The stranger turned to her, and Eleanor found herself caught in the full force of his attention. Up close, she could see the weathered lines around his eyes that spoke of long days under the sun, the faint scar that traced along his jaw, the surprising gentleness in his expression despite the hard planes of his face. "I am fine," Eleanor said automatically, then felt foolish for the obvious lie. She was shaking, her hands trembling as they gripped the counter, her bad leg aching from the sudden movement. "I mean, thank you for intervening. They were drunk and stupid, but mostly harmless." "Mostly harmless is how things start before they become actually harmful," the stranger said. He bent to pick up a handkerchief that had fallen from Eleanor's basket during the confrontation, and she noticed the careful way he moved, economical and precise. When he straightened and held it out to her, she saw that his hands were scarred with old rope burns and what looked like a healed bullet wound across his knuckles. "You're right, of course." Eleanor took the handkerchief, tucking it back into her basket. "I should not have to make excuses for their behavior. I am Eleanor Hayes." "Colt Brennan." He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that felt old-fashioned and courtly. "I just rode in this morning looking for work. Heard the cattle yards are hiring for the season." "They are always hiring," Eleanor confirmed. "Dodge City is the wildest cattle town in Kansas during the season. You will have no trouble finding work if you know your way around a herd." "I have been driving cattle since I was 14, Colt said. "Worked my way up from Texas to Montana and most places in between. Figured I would try Kansas for a change of scenery." Eleanor found herself studying him more closely, noting details she had missed in the initial confrontation. He was older than her by several years, perhaps 28 or 29, with the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from hard living rather than pampered ease. There was something in his eyes that spoke of pain he kept carefully locked away, a kind of understanding that came from personal experience rather than mere sympathy. "Well, Mr. Brennan, I hope you find Dodge City to your liking," Eleanor said, suddenly aware that she had been staring. She reached for her basket, but Colt moved faster. "Let me carry that for you," he offered. "Where are you headed?" "Mrs. Patterson's boarding house on 3rd Street, Eleanor said, "but you do not need to trouble yourself. I am perfectly capable of managing my own laundry." "I do not doubt your capability for a second, Miss Hayes." Colt's tone was sincere, not patronizing. "But I am headed that direction anyway, and it seems foolish for both of us to make the trip with full hands when we could share the burden." Eleanor wanted to refuse, wanted to prove that she needed no one's help, but something in his expression stopped her. He was not offering out of pity. He was offering because it was the practical thing to do, because he would have made the same offer to anyone regardless of whether they walked with a limp or danced on air. It was such a novel experience that Eleanor found herself nodding before she fully realized what she was agreeing to. They stepped out into the afternoon heat together, and Eleanor immediately felt the weight of curious stares from every direction. Dodge City was a place where news traveled faster than wildfire, and by sunset everyone would know that Eleanor Hayes had been seen walking with a strange cowboy who carried her laundry like a besotted suitor. The thought should have bothered her more than it did, but somehow with Colt's steady presence beside her, the whispers felt less sharp, less important. "How long have you lived in Dodge City?" Colt asked as they walked, his long strides naturally shortening to match her slower pace without making it obvious or awkward. "I was born here," Eleanor said. "Moved to Abilene with my parents when I was 16. My father had dreams of starting a freight business there, but he died of pneumonia 3 winters ago, and my mother followed him 6 months later. I stayed on for a while trying to make a go of it on my own, but after the raid I decided to come back. My aunt lives here, though she is getting on in years and does not have room for me in her little house." She had not meant to share so much personal history, but something about Colt invited confidence. He listened with real attention, not interrupting or offering empty platitudes, just absorbing her words with thoughtful silence. "The raid," he said quietly. "Is that where you got hurt?" Eleanor's hand instinctively went to her right thigh, where beneath her skirt the worst of the scarring lay hidden from view. The arrow had gone clean through muscle and sinew, and the infection afterward had nearly killed her. The doctor had wanted to amputate, but Eleanor had refused, choosing to risk death rather than lose her leg entirely. She had survived, but her leg had never fully recovered its strength, leaving her with the pronounced limp that now defined her in the eyes of Dodge City society. "Yes," she said simply. "Comanche raided the settlement where I was staying, killed 8 people, took 2 children. I was lucky, I suppose. I survived." "That scar proves you are a survivor now," Colt said, and there was something fierce and admiring in his tone that made Eleanor's breath catch. "Anyone who looks at you and sees weakness is a fool. All I see is someone strong enough to keep standing when life tried its damnedest to knock you down." Eleanor stopped walking, right there in the middle of 3rd Street, with the sun beating down and dust devils spinning in the corners. She turned to face Colt fully, searching his face for any sign that he was mocking her, that this was some elaborate cruelty. But all she found was honest conviction in those storm-gray eyes, a sincerity that made her chest ache with emotions she had thought long buried under layers of self-protection and resigned bitterness. "You do not know me," Eleanor said, but her voice came out soft, wondering rather than defensive. "You do not know what I can or cannot do. I know you walked through town with your head high despite knowing people were talking about you," Colt said. "I know you faced down 3 drunk men without cowering or crying. I know you have been carrying laundry and taking care of yourself in a town that clearly does not make it easy. That tells me everything I need to know about your character, Miss Hayes." No one had spoken to Eleanor like this since before the raid. No one had looked at her and seen strength instead of damage, capability instead of limitation. She felt something long frozen inside her chest begin to thaw, painful and terrifying and strangely exhilarating all at once. "The boarding house is just ahead," she managed to say, gesturing toward the 2-story building with its faded blue paint and welcoming front porch. "Thank you for walking with me, Mr. Brennan." "Colt," he corrected, "and it was my pleasure entirely. I wonder, Miss Hayes, if you might join me for dinner this evening? Nothing fancy, just the restaurant by the hotel serves decent steak, and I would appreciate the company of someone who knows the town." Eleanor knew she should refuse. Getting involved with a drifting cowboy was asking for heartbreak, especially for someone in her precarious position. But the hopeful expression on Colt's face and the way her own heart leaped at the invitation made her throw caution to the wind. "Eleanor," she said, "if you're going to call yourself Colt, then you had better call me Eleanor. And yes, I will have dinner with you. 6 o'clock? 6 o'clock, Colt confirmed. handing over her basket with a smile that transformed his entire face, making him look younger and more carefree. "I will meet you here." Eleanor watched him walk away, her mind spinning with possibilities and fears in equal measure. She knew this was dangerous, knew that opening herself up to hope was inviting potential pain. But as she climbed the stairs to her small room in the boarding house, she found herself humming a tune she had not sung since before the raid, and for the first time in 2 years, the future felt like something worth looking forward to rather than something to merely endure. The afternoon passed with agonizing slowness. Eleanor tried to focus on her sewing work, a dress commission for one of the less judgmental town matrons, but she found her stitches going crooked as her mind wandered to thoughts of gray eyes and gentle smiles. She changed her clothes 3 times, frustrated by her limited wardrobe and wishing she had something prettier than her 2 serviceable day dresses and one slightly fancier gown she saved for church. She finally settled on the church dress, a deep green cotton with cream lace at the collar that brought out the red highlights in her brown hair. When she made her way downstairs at 5 minutes to 6, Mrs. Patterson looked up from her knitting with raised eyebrows. "Going somewhere special, Eleanor, dear?" "Just dinner with an acquaintance," Eleanor said, trying to sound casual even as her palms grew damp with nervousness. "Nothing important." "An acquaintance who happens to be that handsome cowboy who carried your laundry?" Mrs. Patterson's eyes twinkled with mischief. "The entire town is buzzing about it." Martha Kenning nearly choked on her tea when she heard. "Good," Eleanor said with more venom than she intended. "Maybe she will mind her own business for once." Mrs. Patterson laughed, a warm, throaty sound. "That woman has not minded her own business in 40 years. Do not let the gossips ruin your evening, dear. You deserve some happiness." The kindness in the older woman's voice made Eleanor's eyes prick with unexpected tears. Mrs. Patterson had always treated her well, never raising the rent despite Eleanor's sometimes late payments, always making sure she had enough to eat even when funds were tight. It was good to be reminded that not everyone in Dodge City judged her for circumstances beyond her control. Colt was waiting on the porch when Eleanor stepped outside, and the way his face lit up when he saw her made her feel beautiful for the first time in years. He had cleaned up, she noticed, his dark hair still damp from washing, his shirt fresh and his boots polished to a shine. He looked like a man who cared about making a good impression, and something warm unfurled in Eleanor's chest at the realization. "You look lovely," Colt said, offering his arm. "That color suits you perfectly." "You clean up rather well yourself," Eleanor said, taking his arm and feeling the solid strength of muscle beneath the cotton fabric. They walked slowly, accommodating her pace without discussion, and Eleanor found herself relaxing into the evening as they made their way down the main street toward the Dodge House restaurant. The restaurant was busy with the dinner crowd, full of drovers and businessmen and families enjoying the cool of the evening. The hostess, a woman named Sarah who sometimes bought embroidery work from Eleanor, smiled warmly as she led them to a table by the window. If she noticed Eleanor's limp or thought it strange that she was dining with a man, she gave no indication, simply promising to send their waiter over promptly. "Tell me about cattle driving," Eleanor said once they had ordered their meals. "It sounds like dangerous work." "It can be," Colt admitted. "Stampedes, river crossings, bad weather, hostile territory, but there is something about it that gets into your blood. Being out under the stars, testing yourself against the land, working with good men toward a common goal. I have seen sunrises over the prairie that would make you believe in God even if you had never set foot in a church." "You make it sound almost poetic," Eleanor said, charmed by the way his voice softened when he talked about the work he clearly loved. "Most cowboys I have met only talk about the drinking and gambling they do when the drive is over." "Oh, there is plenty of that too." Colt admitted, with a self-deprecating grin. "I have had my share of wild nights and stupid decisions, but I like to think I have learned something from my years on the trail. Life is too short and too precious to waste it entirely on things that do not matter." Their food arrived, thick steaks with potatoes and greens, and they ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Eleanor found herself studying Colt when she thought he was not looking, noticing the way he cut his meat with precise movements, the way his eyes constantly scanned the room, not with paranoia, but with the ingrained awareness of someone used to watching for danger. "May I ask you something?" Colt said eventually, setting down his fork and meeting her eyes directly. "And please feel free to tell me if I'm overstepping." "You may ask," Eleanor said, her stomach tightening with anticipation. "Why did you come back to Dodge City if people here treat you poorly? You seem like a woman with skills and intelligence. You could make a life anywhere." Eleanor considered the question carefully, wanting to give him an honest answer rather than the easy platitudes she usually offered when people pried into her choices. "I suppose I came back because it was familiar. After the raid, after everything I survived, I just wanted to be somewhere that felt like home, even if home was not exactly welcoming. My aunt is here, even if we are not close. I know the streets and the people and the rhythms of the town. That felt important when everything else in my life had been turned upside down." "But you were not happy here," Colt said. It was not a question. It was not a... "No," Eleanor admitted. "I'm not happy, but I'm not sure I would be happy anywhere right now. The raid took more from me than just the full use of my leg. It took my sense of safety, my belief that the world was essentially good. I used to be confident, even a little bit wild. Now I feel like I'm just going through the motions of living without really being alive." Colt reached across the table and took her hand, the gesture so natural and warm that Eleanor did not even think to pull away. His palm was calloused and rough against her softer skin, his fingers strong and sure as they wrapped around hers. "I know something about that," he said quietly, "about feeling like you're just surviving instead of living. I lost someone important to me 3 years ago, my younger brother, Jamie. He was only 19, full of dreams and plans. We were on a drive together up in Wyoming when he got thrown from his horse during a storm, broke his neck, died before we could even get him to town." Eleanor squeezed his hand, her heart aching for the pain she could hear beneath his careful words. "I am so sorry, Colt. That must have been devastating." "It was," Colt said. "For a long time afterward, I was angry at everything, angry at the horse, at the storm, at God, at myself for not somehow preventing it. I drank too much and fought too much and generally made a mess of my life. It took me 2 years to realize that Jamie would not have wanted that. He would have wanted me to keep living, really living, not just going through the motions." "Is that why you keep moving from place to place?" Eleanor asked gently, still trying to figure out what living means. "Maybe," Colt said. "Or maybe I've just been waiting to find something worth staying in one place for." The intensity in his gaze made Eleanor's breath catch. She knew what he was implying, knew that this conversation had moved far beyond the casual getting-to-know-you chatter of a first dinner. They were circling around something deeper, something that both excited and terrified her. "Colt," she said carefully, "you just met me. You do not know if I am worth anything." "I know enough," he said firmly. "I know you are brave and strong and honest. I know you make me want to be better than I have been. I know that when I look at you, I see someone who understands what it means to survive the worst and keep going. That is worth everything." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, but this time they were not tears of shame or pain, but of something perilously close to hope. "I do not know how to do this," she admitted. "I have not let anyone close since the raid. I do not know if I even remember how to trust someone." "Then we will figure it out together," Colt said. "One day at a time, no promises except honesty and patience. I'm not asking you to know all the answers right now, Eleanor. I'm just asking for a chance to show you that not everyone will let you down." They talked late into the evening, long after their plates had been cleared and the restaurant had begun to empty around them. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their childhoods and their dreams for the future, finding unexpected common ground in their love of books and their complicated relationships with faith. Eleanor could not remember the last time she had laughed so freely or felt so completely understood by another person. When Colt finally walked her back to the boarding house, the moon had risen full and bright over Dodge City, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. They stood on the porch for a long moment, neither quite willing to end the evening. "May I see you again tomorrow?" Colt asked. I have to check in with the cattle yards in the morning, but I will be free by afternoon. I would like that, Eleanor said. I usually take a walk by the river on Sundays after church. You could join me if you wanted. I would like nothing better, Colt said. He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, the gesture so sweet and old-fashioned that Eleanor felt her heart flutter wildly in her chest. Sleep well, Eleanor. Good night, Colt, she whispered, and watched him walk away into the darkness before floating up to her room like a woman in a dream. The next weeks passed in a blur of stolen moments and growing intimacy. Colt found work easily at the cattle yards, proving himself capable and reliable enough that the foreman quickly promoted him to a position of authority over the other drovers. He spent his mornings working and his afternoons and evenings with Eleanor, walking with her through town despite the stares and whispers, carrying her parcels and making her laugh with stories from his years on the trail. Eleanor found herself coming alive again in ways she had thought impossible. Colors seemed brighter. Food tasted better. And even her sewing work improved as her hands regained their old steadiness and confidence. She still limped, still struggled with stairs and uneven ground, but somehow with Colt beside her those limitations felt less defining, less important than her growing certainty that she had found something precious and rare. Not everyone in Dodge City approved of their budding relationship. Martha Kenning and her circle of gossips worked overtime spreading rumors about the impropriety of a crippled seamstress taking up with a drifting cowboy, about how Colt must have ulterior motives or Eleanor must be compromising her virtue. But for every nasty comment there seemed to be a counterweight of kindness, people like Mrs. Patterson and Mr. Wong and Sarah at the restaurant who went out of their way to show their support. It was a month into their courtship when Colt first kissed her. They had been walking by the Arkansas River watching the sun set in streaks of orange and gold across the prairie sky. Eleanor had been telling him about her dream of opening her own dress shop someday, a place where women could come for beautiful clothes without judgment or pretension. Colt had been listening with that focused attention he always gave her, and when she finished talking, he simply cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with such tenderness that Eleanor felt her entire world shift on its axis. "I am falling in love with you," Colt whispered against her lips. "I think I started falling that first day in the laundry when you faced down those fools with your chin up and fire in your eyes. I need you to know that. I need you to understand that this is real for me." "I am falling in love with you too," Eleanor confessed, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess them or lock them away behind walls of self-protection. "It terrifies me, but it also makes me feel more alive than I have in years." They kissed again, longer and deeper, and Eleanor felt the last of her carefully constructed defenses crumble away. She was vulnerable now in a way she had not been since before the raid, open to hurt and disappointment and loss. But she was also open to joy and connection and the possibility of building something beautiful with this unexpected man who had wandered into her life and changed everything. The summer deepened into August heat, and the cattle yards grew busier as more herds arrived from Texas and beyond. Colt worked long hours, but he always made time for Eleanor, always showed up when he promised, always treated her like she was the most important person in his world. They fell into comfortable rhythms together, shared meals and quiet evenings and Sunday walks that became the highlight of Eleanor's week. It was in early September when Colt came to her with a proposition that would change both their lives. They were sitting on the porch of the boarding house, enjoying the cooling evening air after a particularly hot day. Colt had been quiet all evening, clearly working up the courage to say something important. "I have been offered a job," he said finally. "Ranch manager position on a spread about 30 miles west of here. Good pay, permanent position, a house that comes with the job. It is exactly the kind of opportunity I've been hoping for." Eleanor felt her heart sink even as she tried to smile supportively. "That sounds wonderful, Colt. You deserve that kind of security." "I want you to come with me," Colt said, taking both her hands in his, "as my wife. Marry me, Eleanor. Let me spend the rest of my life proving to you that you are cherished and valued and loved beyond measure." Eleanor stared at him, her mind reeling. Marriage, a real home, a future that stretched beyond day-to-day survival into something expansive and full of possibility. It was everything she had stopped allowing herself to dream about, and now it was being offered to her like a gift she had not dared hope for. "What about my leg?" Eleanor heard herself ask, hating the vulnerability in her voice but needing to hear his answer. "What about the fact that I cannot do all the things a ranch wife needs to do? What about when people see us together and wonder why a man like you settled for damaged goods?" Colt's expression turned fierce, and he pulled her close until their foreheads touched. "Your leg is part of you, Eleanor, but it does not define you any more than my scars define me. As for what people think, I stopped caring about that the moment I fell in love with you. You are not damaged goods. You are a woman who survived hell and came out stronger. You are intelligent and brave and beautiful, and I would be honored beyond words if you would consent to be my wife." Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face, but this time they were tears of pure joy. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes, I will marry you." "I love you, Colt Brennan, and I cannot imagine spending my life with anyone else." They kissed there on the porch, with Mrs. Patterson discreetly watching from the window and the evening stars beginning to appear overhead. Eleanor felt like she was floating, untethered from all the pain and fear that had weighed her down for so long. She was still scared, still uncertain about the future, but for the first time since the raid, she believed that happiness was possible, that she deserved good things, that her life could be about more than just surviving. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Methodist church. Eleanor wore a new dress she had sewn herself, pale blue with delicate embroidery at the cuffs, and carried wildflowers that Colt had picked that morning from the prairie. Her aunt attended, along with Mrs. Patterson and Mr. Wong and a surprising number of other townsfolk who had come to appreciate Eleanor's quiet strength over the years. Even Sarah from the restaurant came, bringing a beautiful cake she had baked as a wedding gift. Martha Kenning and her gossips were notably absent, which suited Eleanor just fine. She was done caring about the opinions of people who had never tried to understand her, never offered her anything but judgment and pity. Her future was with Colt now, and as she spoke her vows with his hands warm and steady around hers, she felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her like a blessing. The ranch was called the Double Bar M, and it sprawled across 5,000 acres of prime grazing land with a creek running through the south pasture and views of the prairie that stretched endlessly toward distant horizons. The house was modest but well built, a 2-story structure with a wide front porch and enough room for a growing family. The previous manager had left it in decent condition, and Eleanor immediately began making plans for improvements, curtains for the windows, and a garden plot behind the house where she could grow vegetables and flowers. Colt threw himself into his new role with characteristic determination, proving quickly that the owner's faith in him had been well placed. He managed the other ranch hands with a combination of fairness and firmness that earned their respect, and he had an almost instinctive understanding of cattle and horses that made the work look easy, even when Eleanor knew it was anything but. He came home every evening tired and dusty but happy, always greeting Eleanor with a kiss and genuine interest in how her day had been. Eleanor discovered that she loved ranch life more than she had expected. She could not ride horses or help with the herding, but she found dozens of other ways to contribute. She took over the ranch accounts, her neat handwriting and head for figures bringing order to years of chaotic record keeping. She sewed and mended clothes for the ranch hands, her skilled needlework saving the money they would have spent in town. She cooked meals that filled the house with welcoming smells and brought the men together at the long table in the kitchen for food and fellowship. Most importantly, she felt useful and valued in ways she had never experienced in Dodge City. The ranch hands treated her with respect that had nothing to do with pity and everything to do with genuine appreciation for her contributions. When she struggled with her leg on bad days, someone always materialized to help without making a fuss about it, carrying heavy items or offering an arm on uneven ground in the same matter-of-fact way they would help anyone who needed it. As autumn painted the prairie in shades of gold and crimson, Eleanor realized she was truly happy for the first time since before the raid. She woke up each morning next to a man who loved her completely, spent her days doing work that mattered, and fell asleep each night feeling safe and cherished. The nightmares that had plagued her for years began to fade, replaced by dreams of the future and all the possibilities it held. It was in late October when Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, recognizing the signs from watching her friends back in Abilene go through the same process, but she waited until she was certain before telling Colt. She chose a quiet evening after dinner, when they were sitting together on the porch watching the sunset over the prairie in streaks of orange and purple. "I have something to tell you," Eleanor said, taking Colt's hand and placing it over her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby, sometime in late spring, if I am calculating correctly." Colt's face went through a rapid succession of expressions before settling on pure, incandescent joy. "A baby, he whispered, his hand spreading wide over her belly, as if he could already feel the life growing there. "Eleanor, are you serious? We're going to be parents?" "We are going to be parents," Eleanor confirmed, laughing at his obvious delight. "Are you happy about it?" "Happy?" Colt pulled her into his arms, holding her close enough that she could feel his heart racing against her cheek. "I am beyond happy. I am terrified and excited and grateful beyond words. A baby, our baby." They talked late into the night about names and plans and dreams for their growing family. Colt worried about whether he would be a good father, about whether he had enough to offer a child. Eleanor worried about the practicalities of caring for an infant when her legs sometimes made even simple tasks challenging. But beneath the worries was a foundation of love and commitment that made everything feel possible. The winter was mild that year, and Eleanor spent it preparing for the baby's arrival with single-minded focus. She sewed tiny clothes and blankets, transforming the small room next to their bedroom into a nursery with cheerful yellow curtains and a cradle that Colt built with his own hands. Mrs. Patterson sent packages from Dodge City filled with practical items and encouraging notes. Even Eleanor's aunt wrote, awkwardly offering congratulations and what passed for her blessing. As Eleanor's belly grew round and prominent, she found herself marveling at the miracle of new life taking shape inside her. She talked to the baby constantly, telling stories about their father and promising all the love and security she could provide. On the difficult days when her leg ached worse than usual or the pregnancy discomforts became overwhelming, Colt was always there with gentle hands and patient support, rubbing her back and helping her elevate her bad leg and never once complaining about the ways pregnancy had disrupted their normal routines. The baby arrived on a warm May evening in 1879 after 14 hours of labor that tested Eleanor's strength in ways even the Comanche raid had not. The local midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Garrett, guided her through the process with calm efficiency while Colt paced anxiously outside the bedroom door, unable to help but unwilling to go far. When Eleanor finally heard her baby's first cry, strong and healthy and full of indignation at being thrust into the bright world, she felt something in her chest expand until she thought she might burst from the sheer, overwhelming force of love. Mrs. Garrett placed the squirming, red-faced infant in her arms, and Eleanor stared down at her son through tears of exhaustion and joy. "You have a beautiful, healthy boy," Mrs. Garrett announced, opening the door to let Colt in. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and lungs like a champion. Colt came to the bedside, his face wet with tears he made no attempt to hide. He touched the baby's tiny hand with one finger, and Eleanor watched in wonder as their son's impossibly small fingers wrapped around his father's much larger one. "Hello, little one," Colt whispered. "I am your papa, and I promise to do everything in my power to keep you safe and loved for the rest of my life." They named him James, after Colt's brother, and from his first day on Earth he was the center of their universe. Eleanor had worried that caring for an infant while managing her disability would be impossible, but she quickly discovered that love made her more resourceful than she had ever imagined. She learned to nurse him while keeping her leg elevated, to change him on surfaces that did not require bending, to ask for help when she needed it without feeling diminished. Colt was a devoted father, coming in from the ranch work throughout the day to check on his wife and son, getting up for midnight feedings without complaint, walking James around the house for hours when he was fussy. Eleanor watched her husband transform into a father and fell even more deeply in love with him, amazed by his capacity for tenderness and patience. As James grew from infant to toddler, the ranch thrived under Colt's management. The owner was so impressed with his work that he increased Colt's pay and responsibilities, putting him in charge of buying new breeding stock and making decisions that shaped the ranch's future. Colt proved to have a gift for the business side of ranching as well as the physical work, and he and Eleanor spent many evenings discussing strategies and plans, partners in every sense of the word. When James was 2 years old, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant again. This time a daughter arrived, red-haired like Eleanor's mother had been, with her father's gray eyes and a personality that made itself known from her first moments. They named her Rose, and she completed their family in ways Eleanor had not known were missing. The years passed in the kind of happiness that Eleanor had once thought existed only in fairy tales. James grew into a sturdy boy who followed his father everywhere, learning the ranch work with the same dedication Colt had shown at his age. Rose was fierce and fearless, climbing things she should not climb, and asking questions that challenged Eleanor's patience and delighted her heart. Colt remained devoted and present, never taking his family for granted, always finding ways to show Eleanor that she was cherished. Eleanor's limp never went away, and there were still days when the old wound ached and limited what she could do. But she had learned that her worth was not determined by what her body could or could not accomplish. She was a skilled seamstress, a capable ranch manager, a loving mother, and a cherished wife. She was all these things not in spite of her injury, but simply alongside it. Her disability just one part of a complicated, beautiful, thoroughly lived life. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Colt surprised Eleanor with a trip back to Dodge City. They left the children with Mrs. Garrett and spent 2 days retracing the steps of their courtship, eating at the same restaurant where they had their first dinner, walking by the river where they had shared their first kiss. The town had changed in the decades since they left, growing wilder and then more civilized as the cattle trade evolved and the frontier began to close. They ran into Martha Kenning on the main street, and Eleanor was amused to see the older woman's face pinch with displeasure at the sight of them. Colt was even more handsome at 38 than he had been at 28, and Eleanor knew she looked happy and well-loved despite the gray beginning to thread through her brown hair and the permanent lines around her eyes. "Eleanor," Martha said stiffly, "I heard you were living on a ranch somewhere. Is it treating you well?" "Very well, thank you," Eleanor said sweetly, taking Colt's arm and feeling his silent support radiating through the contact. "My husband is the manager of one of the most successful ranches in the region, and we have 2 beautiful children. Life has been very kind to us." Martha's expression suggested she had swallowed something sour, but she managed a tight smile. "How lovely. Well, I must be going. Do give my regards to your aunt." They watched her hurry away, and then Colt pulled Eleanor close and kissed her right there on the main street of Dodge City, making a spectacle that would fuel gossip for weeks. Eleanor laughed against his lips, not caring one bit what anyone thought, secure in the knowledge that she had built a life full of love and meaning on her own terms. That evening, as they prepared to leave Dodge City and return to the ranch and the children they missed fiercely, Eleanor stood at the window of their hotel room looking out over the town where her new life had begun. Colt came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" Eleanor asked, "tying yourself to a woman with a permanent limp? There must be times when you wonder what life would have been like if you had chosen differently." Colt turned her to face him, his expression serious and intent. "I have never regretted you for even 1 second, Eleanor Brennan. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You gave me love and family and purpose. You taught me that strength has nothing to do with a perfect body and everything to do with a courageous heart. Every single day I wake up grateful that I walked into that laundry and found you." "I love you," Eleanor said, the words as true now as they had been the first time she spoke them. "Thank you for seeing past what everyone else saw. Thank you for recognizing that I was a survivor, not a victim." "You never needed me to save you," Colt said. "You were already saving yourself. I just had the incredible luck of being the man you chose to save yourself with." They returned to the ranch the next day, to James and Rose, and the life they had built together through determination and love and absolute faith in each other. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and joys in equal measure. James grew into a fine young man who eventually took over as ranch manager when Colt decided to slow down. Rose married a neighboring rancher's son and gave Eleanor and Colt their first grandchildren, twin boys who had their grandmother's stubborn spirit and their grandfather's gentle strength. Eleanor never did open her own dress shop, but she discovered she did not need to. She found fulfillment in her family, in the ranch work, in the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived on her own terms. Her limp remained her constant companion, a reminder of the worst night of her life and all the strength she had found in its aftermath. She no longer saw it as a mark of shame, but as a badge of survival, proof that she had faced the darkness and emerged into light. On warm summer evenings, when the prairie stretched golden and endless toward horizons that held infinite possibility, Eleanor would sit on the porch with Colt's hand warm in hers and count her blessings, a husband who loved her completely, children and grandchildren who filled her life with joy, a home that sheltered and sustained her, a past she had survived, and a future she had built with her own scarred, imperfect hands. She was not the woman she had been before the raid, and that was all right. She was someone better, someone who understood that true strength came not from avoiding injury, but from continuing to live fully despite it. She was a survivor, exactly as Colt had named her that first day in Dodge City, and she had learned that surviving was just the beginning of a much larger story about hope and healing and the transformative power of being truly loved. Years later, when Eleanor was in her 60s and her children had children of their own, her granddaughter asked her about the scar on her leg that caused her limp. They were sitting together on the same porch where Eleanor had accepted Colt's proposal all those decades ago, shelling peas for dinner while the late afternoon sun painted everything in shades of amber and gold. "Tell me about your scar, Grandma," little Sarah asked with the frank curiosity of a 7-year-old. "Does it hurt?" Eleanor looked down at her leg, hidden beneath her skirt but still present, still part of her story. "Sometimes it aches," she admitted, "especially when the weather changes or when I have been on my feet too long, but mostly I do not think about it anymore." "Were you sad when you got hurt?" Sarah asked her mop. "I was very sad," Eleanor said honestly, "and scared. For a long time I thought that scar meant I was broken, that no one would ever see me as whole again. But then I met your grandfather and he taught me something important." "What did he teach you?" "He taught me that scars just prove we survived something difficult. They are not marks of weakness, but signs of strength. Your grandfather looked at me and saw a survivor, and that helped me learn to see myself the same way." Sarah considered this with the seriousness of childhood, her small face thoughtful. "I think your scar is beautiful, Grandma. It is part of your story." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, amazed as always by the wisdom of children. "You are absolutely right, sweetheart. It is part of my story, and my story turned out to be full of love and happiness, even with the sad and scary parts mixed in." Colt emerged from the house at that moment, moving more slowly than he once had, but still strong and capable at 68. He smiled at the sight of his wife and granddaughter together, and Eleanor felt her heart swell with the same love she had felt that first evening when he had spoken to her with such unexpected kindness. "What are my 2 favorite ladies talking about?" Colt asked, settling into his rocking chair with a contented sigh. Grandma was telling me about how you fell in love, Sarah announced, about how you told her that her scar proved she was a survivor. Did I say that? Colt winked at Eleanor. I must have been pretty smart back then. You are still pretty smart, Eleanor said, reaching over to take his hand, even when you pretend otherwise. They sat together in peaceful silence as the sun set over the prairie, 3 generations connected by blood and love, and the understanding that life's deepest joys often come wrapped in unexpected packages. Eleanor's limp had not disappeared, would never disappear, but it had long ago stopped defining her. She was so much more than the sum of her scars and struggles. She was a woman who had loved and been loved, who had built something beautiful from the broken pieces of a shattered past, who had learned that survival was not the end of the story, but merely the beginning. That evening, after Sarah had been tucked into bed and the house had settled into nighttime quiet, Eleanor and Colt sat together on their bed, helping each other prepare for sleep with the comfortable intimacy of decades spent together. Colt carefully helped Eleanor with her stockings, his fingers gentle as they skimmed over the old scar tissue that still marked her thigh. He pressed a kiss to the damaged skin, a gesture he had repeated countless times over the years, his own way of honoring what she had survived. I love you, Eleanor Brennan, Colt said, looking up at her with eyes that still held all the devotion and admiration of that first day in the laundry. Thank you for letting me love you. Thank you for building this life with me. I love you too, Colt Brennan, Eleanor whispered, running her fingers through his gray-streaked hair. Thank you for seeing the survivor in me when I had forgotten how to see it myself. Thank you for every day of the last 40 years. They lay down together in the bed they had shared for decades, bodies fitting together with practiced ease, hands clasped between them like an anchor against whatever storms might come. Eleanor closed her eyes and felt nothing but gratitude for the wild, unpredictable journey that had brought her from that dusty street in Dodge City to this moment of perfect peace. Her leg still bore its scar, visible proof of the worst night of her life, but her heart bore a different kind of mark entirely, the indelible imprint of a love that had healed her in ways no medicine ever could. She was a survivor, exactly as Colt had recognized all those years ago, and survival had led her to a life more beautiful than any she could have imagined in her darkest moments. The prairie wind whispered through the open window, carrying with it the scent of wild grass and possibility, and Eleanor drifted into sleep with a smile on her face and her husband's steady heartbeat beneath her palm, the two of them together writing the final chapters of a love story that had begun with kindness and grown into something legendary, a testament to the truth that the deepest scars often mark the strongest souls.